So, today on the Awesome Marriage Podcast, we're talking about tips for healthy parenting perspective. So, I have gained some experience through 17 years of parenting, but I'm definitely still learning. And when I was a young and pretty clueless mom, I was desperate for wisdom about how to parent well. How can we develop a healthy perspective that helps us love our kids well in each season? Well, this is something I really want to hear Dr. Kim's take on because he has not only got a great relationship with his adult kids, but he and Nancy also have great relationships with their grandkids. So, Dr. Kim, what would be your first tip for how to develop healthy parenting perspective?
Yeah, and I think it's so for us, it was to be adult friends with our kids. And it really came out of a young man I was counseling years and years ago when our kids were little. And he was graduating from high school, and we are talking about where he was going to college. And it didn't really matter as long as it could be the farthest away that he could get from where his family lived. And I said, "You really want to move that far away? You might not get to come home for holidays." And he said, "I don't think I'm coming home for holidays." And I thought, okay, obviously there were a lot of issues there that we had to work through, but it helped me see that I don't want that. I don't want that to even be something that my kids think about. We want to be friends. And so I think Nancy and I together, we would treat them as they were, I think, growing up, giving them responsibility, letting them fulfill that responsibility, being able to give them more responsibility, all those kind of things, the way we respected them and treated them. And as they gained privileges, our goal was the time they got to be 18, that they were pretty autonomous. They
Mm.
didn't, the last half of their senior year, they didn't have curfews. We really wanted them to experience while they were in the safety net of home, some things they would experience outside of the home. And so
Mm.
I think all that was a process of our kids seeing that we gave them opportunities to show maturity and growth. And when they did, they were rewarded for it. And that we just gradually, we kind of, Dave Ramsey uses the example of giving the kids a little more rope. And then when they graduate, he gives them the whole rope. And I loved that analogy. It's kind of
Mm.
like, okay, we've done our part. We want to be friends with you the rest of your lives. But, this is your deal now. And,
Mhm.
you know, we're here for you, but this is your deal. And so I think that evolved, and that's the same thing with our grandkids. We've got one that's married now and we're close to them, she and her husband, and then my grandson that graduated from high school. And so just seeing them as adults and beginning to have adult relationships with them is really cool too.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's the whole full circle.
it
That's
is.
great.
It is.
That's awesome. Well, that's something that I'm thinking a lot about as my oldest is about to turn 17. And um, it's just, I've had a big wake up call with this concept of how perspective, like our perspective in parenting has got to get bigger because I used to think about, I loved the baby stage, even the newborn stage that drives people crazy. I just thought it was the sweetest thing. And toddlers were so much fun because you just, everything is an adventure, everything is discovery. And so as my kids got older, I kind of missed that and wanted
Mhm.
to go back. But then I started to realize that that would be going against actually God's design for them. Nothing that he has created stays stagnant, but everything continues to go through seasons. And so when I started to realize actually those younger stages are a short season, and if God willing, the adult season is even longer. And then I realized I need to let his perspective shape my perspective rather than trying to grip and hold on tight. That would just be wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes our tendency is to do that.
Hmm.
And yet I don't think that, it's always hard. I have so many kids I've counseled over the years that would be like 13 and 14. And the complaint was my parents still treat me like I'm 9 or 10. And I think a
Hmm.
lot of it is one, they grow really quickly and sometimes we don't catch up with them. But I think it is being aware of where they are, what stage they're in, what level of maturity they're showing, and come alongside them at that stage.
Hmm.
And the letting go process is not easy.
Hmm.
I'll never forget the first time our kids both drove out of the driveway for the first time when they had their license and nobody's in the car but them. And it's just a really weird feeling when it happens, but they had
Hmm.
earned that privilege. We trusted
Hmm.
them to drive. They showed responsibility. But it's still a letting go process, you
Hmm.
know. It's still
Oh
wanting to
yeah.
run out in the street and say, "Move over, I'm
Yeah.
driving," you know.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
but I think it's respecting them and giving them the opportunities to grow and to relate to them on that level as they grow.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and then it's important to realize too that if we don't let them grow, if we don't respect that, we're not doing a good job preparing them for the
Mm,
world.
absolutely.
And I say that as somebody who I just admitted I love, the little stages and the bigger stuff is harder for me, but I had to realize if I try to keep them in some kind of box, they're not going to be prepared for adulthood. They're not going to be prepared to be on their own.
I
And
know.
that's doing them a disservice.
Yeah, and I think in some ways there is a segment of our population that is in that situation, and we
Mhm.
see some young adults that
Mm.
just don't quite have it all together yet. And I'm
Mhm.
not saying where that always came from the parents, but we do see some of that. I think probably more
Mhm.
than I've seen in a while.
Hmm. Yeah. That's actually I feel like it's pretty sobering. Like having teen kids in the house now has been very sobering for me to help see the seasons in perspective and to say, "Hey, there is the end of the active parenting phase, and we actually want to see them succeed. We wanna see them do really well.
Right.
So what can we do to get them there?"
Exactly, and it's what we all want, and I think we have
Mhm.
to keep that in perspective too. Our goal
Mhm.
is, I mean, they're really God's anyway. He gives them
Mhm.
to us for a period of time to teach and train, and hopefully they come to Christ during that time and all those things
Mhm.
that we really want and pray for. But then there's a time that it's time for them to fly on their own, and we
Yeah,
have to let them do that, and we pair them as best they can. And I think the other thing is knowing that it's okay if they make mistakes, because
totally.
if you learn from them, then that's how you grow. I mean, really,
Mhm.
when I look back over our life and our marriage, probably the mistakes we made that we let God heal or turn
Mhm.
around, that's the things that we really learned that have made a big difference.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's
So,
true. That's a good teacher experience.
but it's hard. It's hard. You
Yes.
want to keep them safe all the time, like the little
Yes.
toddler. Don't want them to fall in a way that really hurts them. Those kind
Mhm.
of things.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important thing too in in that topic, just to remember that God's purpose for them is bigger than ours, that
Yes,
we're preparing them for his purposes. It's not for our gratification or for our validation as parents, but so they can go off and be on mission for him in their life.
absolutely.
Yeah, so
Good.
I did wanna mention one thing, if this is a pain point for you or for you and your spouse, we have a 100 questions to get on the same page parenting workbook at awesomemarriage.com, and it's a lot of questions, but even if you just do a few or do them here and there, it's a hard topic to stay on the same page because there's always a lot going on.
I agree, and I think the couples I work with, a lot of times, they really do have the same end goal for their kids.
Mhm,
It's just the different ways of getting there, and so the more you can use a tool like this to help you understand each other, get on the same page,
mhm.
it benefits you as a couple. It's gonna take a lot of stress out, and I think it benefits your kids, because when the
Yeah.
kids see parents with differing on ideas or things like that, they're kids. They're little sinners. They want their way, and so they'll
Mhm.
figure that out. So the
Oh,
more we
yes.
can learn to stand together as parents, the better it is for them and for us.
Totally, yes.
Yeah.
But that is not an easy thing to do, so
No, it takes work. It
it
definitely
does.
takes work.
Yes, yes. So what is your number 2 tip for us?
I think kind of what you just said. I was saying the faith, praying for them, praying with
Mm,
them, knowing that God does love them more than we do, but making that just an important part of their life. We wanted them to see that as a part of our life. And I think it does. It's interesting when I meet somebody never met before, and they're a Christian, there is, after we sit and talk for a while, there's a common bond there. Well, I think
mm,
that's what we want with our kids. We want them to know
mhm,
Christ. We want that relationship. We want to model that, and then when the time comes for them to embrace that for themselves and to accept Christ. And we've done. I think we did a pretty good job with our kids, because they saw us pray. We prayed with them, and the goal was that they would do that with their kids, and they do, and so
mm.
that's really encouraging. And that I've gotten to baptize three of my grandkids so far, three of the five, so that's been pretty
Wow.
cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Mhm.
So that faith component, that's an important one too that I put on my list of tips is that we have to expect that they need Jesus and that we also need Jesus. So that's giving room for grace. and
Absolutely.
not being surprised that they need our grace, and not being surprised that we need that as parents. Because if we're laboring under this assumption that we can do it perfectly, we are going to be really frustrated. But if we're able to recognize that we need Jesus and that our kids do too, then we can not only model giving them grace, but also model apologizing and repenting and asking forgiveness, which I think is a really important thing to be able to normalize in a family.
I totally agree. I think especially the older kids, they know when we screw up. I mean, and so if we don't apologize or we don't acknowledge in that, what are we modeling for them? Well, we're not really
Mhm.
modeling what building relationships is all about. And there has to be forgiveness in that. There has to
Mhm.
be, admission that I did something wrong at times because we do. And so I think the more we're able to model that, then it allows our kids to do the same thing.
Mhm. Yes, I think that's a
And that
great
builds
point.
trust and that builds the
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah, and that's what we want.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I really thought of it, but trust is such an important part of that, of being friends with your kids as adults. That trust has to go both ways there for that to be a healthy
Mhm.
relationship. And so you start building that in the years when they're at home.
Yes, and I think too for them to know that if they apologize for something that you're not gonna say, "Yeah, that's right." But yeah, it's more like, "Yeah, I get it because also I need to apologize for things
Absolutely.
too."
Absolutely.
Yeah. Alright, so what's up next? What's the 3rd thing
Uh,
you have?
I think one thing that I've seen, I mean, I think some people always ask me, marriage or with kids, what's more important, quality or quantity? And I think it's both for sure. I think as our kids are little, we have to have that time with them. The
Mhm.
quality of time, what connects us with them at a young age, which may be laying in the floor playing
Mhm.
whatever it is with them, or playing games with them, or those kind of things. And I think what I do see though, as our kids get older, I think we have to come into their world more. In other words, where when the kids were little, I could spend 10 or 15 minutes with them. Everything was great. They talked and laughed and all that kind of stuff. If you try to just spend 10 or 15 minutes with a teenager and expect that you get any communication going at all, you're just not most of the time, unless you've really got a special relationship. I mean, I think they have to, it takes not the quantity of time, I think, is really important in spending
Mhm.
that. So as teenagers, always took Julie on dates from the time she was 5, and so we
Mhm.
continued to do that. And with my son, just doing things with him, and just so we had that one-on-one time where they could talk. And there might be times that I'd come in, they were kind of finishing homework, it wasn't quite bedtime, and I'd just come in and lay on the end of the bed, and just
Mhm.
sometimes I'd just lay there till they said something, or I went to sleep, whichever happened first. But I think it is. I think you've got to adjust to them, and I think it's real easy because they come into our world a lot when they're little. As they
Mhm.
get older, you've got to come into their world because it's a lot fuller with different things, and there's other things that they enjoy and other people
Mhm.
that speak into their lives, and so you have to spend some time with it.
Yes. Yes, I agree, and that can look so different for each kid.
Yes.
We've had seasons where several of them were into the same things or had things in common, and then that switches up, so we just have to always be kind of on the lookout, or I find myself on the lookout for, okay, what's something that we can share, what's something that they can appreciate, and where can we find that kind of like overlap on the Venn diagram of things we can both talk about, because if we're talking
Yes.
about Star Wars, I'm not gonna make it very long. I don't have much to contribute. I'll listen to you, but it will be over my head. But, if we can find something else, then we can build on that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too, and not that anybody has to binge all Star Wars movies,
Right?
but you can. But if your kid's really interested in something, I would find that, or it was kind of fun. Sometimes we would read one of the books that they're reading, especially in high school when they're reading some cool literature and different things like
Mhm.
that. To also read it, just so, not to quiz them or anything, but just so we could interact a little bit on it. And so I think you
Yeah.
find those, our kids were both active in sports, and so I learned everything I could about those sports. So I knew when
Mhm.
I was helping them at home, I wasn't hurting them, I was helping them. And
Yeah.
so uh, learning to come into their world, what's important to them, and making that important to you really connects you with your kids.
Yeah, it really does. It does. I feel like I lucked out this season. My 2 high schoolers were both doing the same sport, which was really special because they don't usually, it's my daughter and my son, they don't usually have a lot in common. So that was
Yeah.
really fun just to hear them talk about they're same teammates, they're same coach, and having this kind of bond that was new for them was, that was fun, and then we got to all, watch them and spectate, and that's been a
That's
fun
so
thing, but
cool.
yes. Yeah. And, but it also requires creativity. Sometimes, having like a kid who's learning to drive, you just say, "Hey, wanna go hop in the car and take a drive?" They're never gonna say no to that. And,
No. Oh my gosh, no.
behind that wheel, that mouth just opens up and they just start chatting, and I love that. I look forward to that, and actually, I'm like, "Can we just keep you with your permit for a while so
Yeah.
we can just keep having talks?" But
No, it's interesting. Nancy's been the one who's taught our kids and grandkids to drive, and so Tommy, who's getting ready to turn 16, she's just kinda for the last year, she like, Nancy lets them drive before they get the permit. I mean, she and I just cringe when she does that, but she does. But her relationship with Tommy, which was always good, but now he always used to call me first. Now he calls her son
Uh-oh.
first. It's like, but I think it goes to what you're saying. You had that time, you're doing something, you're spending time with them, you're doing something that they want to do. It's important to them, and so they respond to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's good.
Yes. Yeah, and that's special. That's worth it. Yeah. I've spent more money on, coffee dates with my teenage daughter than I even wanna know, but it's just
Oh,
it's the
it's a
best, you know?
it's an investment. It really is an
It's worth
investment.
it.
You look at it's an investment in that relationship, and there's nothing more
It
important than
is, yeah.
relationships. Yeah.
And now she's got a job at a coffee shop, so it just kind of it brings things back around.
No kidding. So do you
Little
get
discount sometimes.
discount coffee now?
She will hook me up from time to time, not all the
Yes.
time, but sometimes.
But sometimes you
It's
that's good.
great.
That's great.
Yes. All right, so what else do we have? What's your next tip?
There was a study that came out, and this probably been 20 years ago, but I think it was Josh McDowell, who's a Christian speaker, and his organization did some really cool stuff. But it was about a study that was done on not troubled kids, kids that their parents, they're just conflict. They were teenagers. And the only thing they asked them to do is to praise them for something every day for the next 3 months. And the change that they saw was I can't remember all the results not of that, but it was almost every family saw a change in the relationship with their teenager. And I
Wow.
think we forget that we do, well, your grades, yeah, you made 5 A's, but a B. Why'd you make a B in there? Or, instead of
Mhm.
focusing on the positive and things like
Mhm.
that. And so I think learning to praise your kids, looking for something in them every day that you can compliment them on, whether it's a character quality or whether it's
Mhm.
diligence or whether it is a school. I know you studied so hard for that test and it paid off. I'm so proud of you. Just anything you can do to praise them every day. It is healthy for them, and I think healthy for us because we can get that mindset, oh, I wish they wouldn't do this and do that,
Mhm.
or I'm always having to tell them to pick up the room. And so we feel like everything we say to them is almost negative. Well,
Mhm.
when you start saying the positive things, I think you'll be surprised at the different results. I'm not saying they'll automatically start cleaning the room all the time, but it's probably better than nagging at them because that doesn't usually work. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
it just doesn't.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. I don't know the number. Do you know the number of what they say, how many positive comments it takes to, like, balance
It,
out a negative?
it's a lot. Maybe
Yeah.
10, maybe. I mean,
I don't
it's a
know.
pretty good deal. Yes.
Yeah, it's a pretty humbling thing to hear, and I remember hearing that
Yeah.
thinking, "Oh, man, we're in big trouble here," and just in context of, like, even our like, with my marriage, with, Brian and I, and with our kids, I think a lot of times we don't have, like, all the time in the world together, so the time we have, you're kinda taking care of stuff that needs to be addressed, especially with the
Yes.
kids, and so because of that, I felt like as a mom, I was only saying instructions or corrections to my kids, and that was
Mm.
terrible. It just felt really, like, negative, and, so I think just kind of hunting for good things to say and hunting for the positive helped shift my mindset. So I'm actively looking for the positive and looking for the good, looking for that character trait that maybe not expressed right now, but I know
Mhm.
it's in there somewhere, and I
Yeah.
and I wanna call it out and draw it out. Um, that's it's it's kind of a fun way to look at things, like you're kind of on a treasure hunt looking for the good.
Well, and I think the more we do that, the more things you're going to see. I think we get, just all the stuff we
Mhm.
talk about the brain. You put that positive in about your kid and
Yeah.
get some of those ruts that are in there about all the negative things, and you begin to see more things in them too. And so I think as a parent, that's exciting. And I think you go into it with prayer and say, God, I want to
Mhm.
praise my child. I know this child is a gift from you.
Mhm.
Help me every day to see something that I can share with them that will be a praise for them or an encouragement for them. And
Mhm.
I think God will help you show up, and it will become more of a natural part where it may not seem very natural now, and it may seem even awkward or like, how can you don't know my teenager? How can you expect me to do that? No, if you just do it, I think you'll see the payoff.
I think that's really good, and I think it's the same thing we say about with our marriages, just pray, ask God, Help me see this person the way you
Yes,
see them." Oh, since God knows our kids better than we do, we can ask him to help us see all the good things and the purpose he has for them, and I think
absolutely.
he'll answer.
I do
He does.
too. I mean, those are just prayers that I feel like are in line with God's heart. And the Bible tells us that when we pray like that, God shows up. And I've never had him not. One of the interesting
Mhm.
things that Nancy and I think learned um, with our kids, and not that our kids were great kids, but there's times you have to make decisions. I mean,
Mhm.
everybody in the world is going to this party. Are you going to let me go? Or things like that.
Mhm.
And we got to where we would talk, and then we'd just pray in the midst of making the decision. It was
Mhm.
amazing how God showed up, and we were on the same page, and it was clear what we needed to do, and it just made a difference. And I think He's
Mhm.
faithful to do that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
he's
and
not gonna tell
yeah.
me one thing and Nancy another. If we're praying about
Mhm.
something, he's gonna tell us both the same thing. And so
Mhm.
that I think just relying on him and bringing him into that picture helps you see things differently.
Oh, I think that's so good. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
And it's going back to trusting his perspective and his purpose more than our
Yes.
own, which is
Yes.
so good.
Exactly.
Hmm. Well, so do you have another tip for us
I think the last thing I
about
thought, and we've
parenting
kinda
perspective?
talked around, is just you kinda hit at embrace every stage, because I think if you embrace
Mhm.
every stage, and how do you connect from the time that they're that little baby you're just holding your arms and feeding, and the time you spend just talking to them and looking in their eyes and making that connection, that every stage that you look, how do I connect with my child at this stage? And if you make that your
Mhm.
prayer and work on that and embrace every stage, because some stages, like you said, Lindsay, are a lot more fun than others. I mean, toddlers don't
Mhm.
go whatever and roll their eyes at you, they just
Right.
don't. And so some are a little easier than others. So, but I think
Yeah.
embrace every stage. And when I look back over our kids and grandkids, uh, yeah, I think most of the time we did a pretty good job of that. But it has to be
Mhm.
intentional, because there's some stages you think, I know this is just a stage and I hope I survive. But, instead of saying, okay, what can I do and how do I connect in this?
Yeah. That's good. That's good, and I think it does go back to that first thing where you remind us that somebody told you the seasons keep on changing. No, none of them last that long. The
No,
stages all end before you know it. So
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. When I see, I've got a couple of people I see right now, clients that have had babies in the less than the last year. And just to see those kids change
mm,
because usually they break the baby in with them, is just amazing how quickly it is from this
mhm.
thing that you can hold in the palm of your hand. Then now it takes two hands, and then it's going to take more than two hands
Yeah.
to,
Yes.
to hold them. Yeah.
Yes, and then they start growing inches in a month and it just
It's like,
goes.
yes.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. There's one more piece of parenting advice I heard, and I wish I could remember where. I don't, but it was requoted, several times. But the idea that start as you intend to go on, and this is the
Mm,
idea that if you see a small child doing something you wouldn't want to see your teenager doing, go ahead and nip it in the bud. So if you don't want your teenager screaming at the table, go ahead and tell your toddler, we don't scream at the table.
mm,
Not to indulge small behaviors and think we'll get around to that later. And that's not to say that we, look at everything and make everything into a battlefield, but just to kind of know, hey, we're going to take a stand on disrespect and we're going to always address that, or make a decision that in our house, you are not going to be able to climb on the couch and jump off of the roof because if we have you doing that, that's not what I want to live around, these
Right.
kind of things. I think it was a helpful tip that I wish I'd learned sooner. Just to go ahead and set those foundations, know what's important to you, and don't be afraid to make those decisions as a parent and to stick by them.
Hmm. Absolutely. No, that's good.
Yeah. So that was a hard one. At certain times when you're looking at them, oh gosh, do I have to go, make this a thing too?
Yeah.
It feels like that it can go on and on, but it's worth as a parent sticking to your guns when you know something really matters.
Well, and I think too, I had there's an article I read a number of years ago, but it was a policeman that worked with juveniles. And one of the counsel, it was his tips to parents. And one of them that he said in there is that kids need somebody that's bigger or strong or older than them that can say no, that there is security in having
Mm.
somebody that loves them enough to say no. And I think that
Mhm.
really helped me a lot because sometimes we just want, but like you said, if you let your toddler scream, there's a good chance that your teenager's going to scream.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if you, as a toddler, if you say that's just not appropriate, we want you to talk. I want you to tell me. And if you're mad,
Mhm.
it's okay. Let's sit down and talk about it. But you start working with it at a young age. And then by the time they're 16, that's the pattern you've developed with it.
Mhm.
It's hard at 16 if you've let your kid scream for 16 years to
Yeah.
say, okay, we're not going to scream anymore. And then they
Yeah.
scream back at you. Why?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yes, yes. It takes some work, but it's all worth it.
It is. And it's never too late. Even if you've let it go, it's
Yeah.
okay to say, hey, now this is something I messed up and this is not good. It's not something good for you to take with you when you leave this home. It's not something you want to take into your marriage. So let's work on it. And I'm going to start calling you on it. So you can always come in then. It's just a little easier if you've laid that foundation.
Absolutely. And I think the reason that piece of advice encouraged me so much is that I am seeing now things that I've had to go back and say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have let you get away with that." And
Yeah.
as a parent, I've failed you because I gave you the impression this was okay with me, but it wasn't. And so I've had to do that recently is go to, my child in a certain situation and say, I'm afraid that I've allowed you to think that was something that was okay. And I don't think so. So I was encouraged that I should have stuck to it a little sooner, but at the same time, it was received when I did have to come and speak into it.
That's good. Yeah, exactly. And it's just okay to do that.
Yeah, it's not too late.
No, never.
Yeah. Well, this has been a helpful conversation about parenting perspective. Do you have a final word of advice for us today, Dr. Kim?
Yeah, I think Nancy and I just looked at parenting as an adventure, really.
Mm,
God given us these children, and we really did want together to expose them to different things. We had kind of this list of places we wanted to take them and things we wanted them to experience. And we just tried to enjoy every stage. And I think when you do that, when you look at it from that perspective, that every stage really is a gift, there's a purpose there, and there's good things that can happen in every stage, then it kind of changes your perspective. And, you can enjoy your kids at every stage all the way through, and they can be friends when they're adults.
yeah, that's awesome. That's a
Yeah.
great way to look at it. That's
Yeah.
that's actually really fun, a fun way to frame it.
It is fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I hope that everyone's encouraged by this topic. I am. I'm feeling some encouragement this morning or um, today thinking about the topic of parenting perspective. But if you're feeling lost or if you have any questions, you're always invited to reach out to us at info@awesomemarriage.com, or you can message us on social media. We answer all of our emails and our messages. And so you're more than welcome to ask questions and just reach out there. We're happy to hear it. Next week, we're going to be talking about money mistakes that couples
Mhm.
make. So make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast so you don't miss that episode. And make sure you're following us on Facebook, Instagram, and you can find Dr. Kim on TikTok. We
Yeah.
hope
It's
you
fun.
have yeah, he's having a good time over there. We hope you have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.